There we go. So why are insects important? They drive biodiversity. They keep our unwanted bugs down in our gardens, and they are vital pollinators. As we all know, we all have backyards. Sure, you all have lovely gardens that you see all the insects and the pollinators out there. So there are different types of pollinators throughout the world, and they're all important for different reasons, for a variety of our agricultural crops, right down to our backyard gardeners. So 90% of plants benefit from pollination. So what is pollination? I'll go over this quite quickly. It's basically the way that plants reproduce. So what they do is they need the parts of the male sex organ, which is on the anther, to get onto the female part of the flower, which has the ovules in it. So pollination occurs through a variety of means. So obviously you've got insects, then you've got wind, water, and other animals. So not all of our crops use insects for pollination. So there's a lot of things that just use wind. I mean, if you've ever grown corn, you know that it's wind pollinated and not insect pollinated. So there's definitely different types. Okay, different types of pollinators. So bees aren't the only types of pollinators in the world. Wasps, hoverflies, lady beetles, these are all types of pollinators. The photo in the middle here is actually a hoverfly. It gets mistaken for a bee quite a lot. It's the bee that kind of sits and hovers over plants, it's got tiny little antennas. Quite a common sight in your gardens. So, yeah. So bees, there are two main distinct types of bees in the world. We have social bees and we have solitary bees. So social bees are the ones that live in a hive structure. They have a queen, they have workers, and they have the males. So that's most commonly your European honeybee. And here in Australia, we have our stingless bees. Solitary bees are different. They live alone. They don't live in a hive structure. They only produce enough pollen and nectar for their own reproductive purposes, and they generally only produce a handful of young each time they reproduce. So Australia has 2,000 species, roughly. They're still discovering new ones all the time of native bees. And like it says here, the most common type you'll find is the honeybee. Thank you. Okay, so bee basics. Bees require flowers for food. So adults and larvae both eat pollen and nectar. Nectar provides the sugar, but the pollen is truly the powerhouse. Pollen provides them with their protein needs, which helps them create nice, strong hives. So to have a good, healthy, strong hive, a diversity in pollen is better than just having a handful of the same species of plants. Most bees are generalists. However, there are a few select species, particularly our solitaries, that are specialised and have adapted to only forage on a certain type of native plant. So that's why you might find some bees are more common in your backyard than others. It's just because you may not have those specific flowers that they need to survive on. So, social bees. There are two types of social bees, the honeybees and the stingless bees. So you've got Apini and Meloponini. So when you guys become beekeepers, you'll actually become Meloponians. I think that's the word for it, which means you're a stingless beekeeper. I hope I pronounced that right. So stingless bees are native to Australia, but they're actually found all over the world as well. So there is quite a lot in Asia, Southeast Asia, and South America, where they've been keeping stingless bees for hundreds of years. So they've been doing this for quite a long time, a lot longer than we have here. Again, they've evolved in different sides of the world, and they've evolved differently. So we've got a lot of the stingless bees are quite tiny, and then you've got your honeybees, which are actually a little bit bigger. They're the ones that have the stinger. and they are developed over in Europe. So they're not native to Australia, they're not native to America, they're actually originally from Europe. That's why most people will refer to them as European honeybee. But they aren't the only honeybees out there, there are a few other species. So what makes a social bee a social bee? So it has female, as they say, a female caste, which is your queen. She is the only one in a hive that is fertile and can lay eggs. They don't display any solitary phase in their life cycle, so they're always part of a hive, and they can create colonies that live for many years. So whereas a solitary bee is generally only a seasonal bee, will only live for the spring, summertime, and then it will die, and then its young will come off the next spring, summer. Social bees will live for many years, so their colony can live. I've heard of people having colonies for about 20 years, so they live for a very, very long time. And again, it says here that they create large volumes of honey that can be stored and can be used by humans. It's more common in honeybees to harvest the honey because we've developed them to do that. So again, honeybees have been created to provide excess honey, so we've actually done that. They are considered livestock by the Department of Primary Industries. They are livestock because we do use them in that manner. If you do have honeybees, you do need to register them with the Department of Primary Industries, which I'll talk about later as to why you need to do that. Stingless bees haven't had this intervention from humans, so we haven't been interfering with them long enough for them to start producing large amounts of honey to actually extract. You can get a little bit out of it, and it's called sugar bag, and it definitely is different to honey. It's a little bit runnier, it's a little bit different in taste, it's got a bit more of a bitter taste. I was going to bring some for you guys to try, and I forgot to grab it this morning, so I'm really sorry. You will eventually one day get to try it, I'm sure. Again, like I say, they usually only produce enough to provide for their colony, but there are some hives that have been developed to provide an extra little section where they will store extra honey which you can extract. I say that because you can. Unfortunately, our program isn't designed for you to extract the honey from. Here in Sydney, you only have one option. You either extract the honey or you duplicate the hive. So you can't really do both at the same time because it puts too much stress on the colony itself. So I won't go over solitary bees too much because I've got a lot at the end. I don't know whether I'll talk about it much. We'll see how we go. You all got the notes, so you can go over that and research it a bit more. They're a bit of my passion. I love solitary bees. I think they're super cute. But again, they live a solitary life. They don't have a queen. All females can reproduce. All males can reproduce. And like it says here, they nest in different variety of areas. So our stingless bees is called Tetragonlia carbonaria. That is the scientific name for the bee species that we have. They are not the only bee species of stingless bee in Australia. There are probably about 4 species that people keep in hives, and then there are a lot more. I don't know the numbers because they're still discovering new species all the time. So Tetragonlia carbonaria is the only social bee native to Sydney. So this is why we use them in our program, simply because all the other ones are more common north of here. And I'll explain why you don't find them south a little bit later. So again, they live in a hive with a queen and they have worker bees. They store a small amount of pollen and honey, and they're really tiny. They are really small. So it says here they're 3.5 mil long, where a bee is about 12 mil long. So you go a centimetre to less than half a centimetre. Naturally, they will live in hollowed out logs or trees, man-made boxes, which we'll go over today, and they're starting to become more and more common in water meter boxes because there's no habitat for them anymore, so they're finding them. It's far more common up in Queensland, but you may find a couple of species living in your water meter box if you've got one. Not so common here in Sydney, as we don't put our water meter in a box. Again, it's usually hard to attract a wild hive, so it's not like you can just build a box, leave it out in your garden, and suddenly they will fill it up. You usually have to buy them or rescue them, or what we do is duplicate from the current hives we already have. Okay, so I'm just going to say TCs from now on because calling their whole name is really kind of hard. They have a very small foraging range, around 500 to 700 metres. So this is why if you're thinking of getting these bees, you really need to make sure that your backyard or your front yard or your neighbour's yard is going to provide enough food for them. So they're not like the honeybees who can travel kilometres to get their honey. They stay in a very small range. And when you see how big they are, you can understand why. They're tiny. They're not going to fly kilometres to get their food. They obviously need lots of flowering plants. There's approximately between 6,000 and 10,000 bees in a box. And we can see boxes over there. They're very small. So you can imagine just how full these boxes get with bees. Again, they have one queen. She's the only fertile female and she lays all the eggs. After she mates, she'll never leave the hive. So unlike honeybees where a queen, if she doesn't like the hive anymore, she'll leave and you see swarms. That never happens in our species of stingless bee. She becomes too heavy to ever fly again and her wings become completely useless. So the queen will never leave the hive. She'll stay there her whole life until she either dies or she gets ousted by the actual hive itself. Sometimes they're not happy with the queen and they'll kill her off and they'll appoint a new one. They'll actually headbutt her to death. It's pretty extreme. The worker bees are all females. They are sterile females. They do all the work, but they cannot mate. They do not actually have the ability to do that at all, any time in their life. The males, there's a bit of conjecture as to what males do, but I can tell you now it's not much. Their main role is to just wait for what we call a virgin queen and mate with her. That's pretty much it. They don't do really any work inside the hives, as any research has found so far. The other thing you will find in a hive is what we call a virgin queen. So the queen will lay a certain egg and that egg will turn into a virgin queen. And she just kind of waits around for the queen to die or they overthrow her and then she'll be appointed as the new queen. She'll go off and mate, come back and just start the process again. So this is how these hives are able to live for 20, 30 years, is that basically once the queen dies, they just appoint a new virgin queen. And there's usually always a virgin queen or a couple of them waiting around in the hive so that they can become the new queen. And they're always, generally a big strong hive will be laying these virgin queens often. I unfortunately don't have a hive to open today for you guys. I was really hoping I would, but the hive that I wanted to, it's not doing so well at the moment, so I didn't want to open it. But this is inside a hive. Photo's probably not the best. So what you can see here is this part in here with all these little circles, that's what we call the brood. So that's where all the young are laid. So that's where all the larvae are laid. And that's where the virgin queens are laid. On the outside, these are what we call pots. So unlike honeybees who use the hexagonal thing to fill up with honey, our bees use something called a pot. It's actually just made out of wax and they will fill that with either honey or they'll fill it with pollen. So you can see on this side, these yellow bits here, the dark light yellow, that's pollen. And over here you can see these ones here. It's not a very good photo, but they're full of honey. And they'll generally keep them on either side of that. So you'll get one side that's probably full of pollen and one side that's mostly full of honey. And if you get another piece that you can go on top of your box, it's called a super. And generally they fill that just with honey sometimes. So that's kind of what it looks like on the inside. And what happens is she lays all the legs in like a circular pattern, but they go up to the top. When she gets to the top, she just goes back down and starts at the bottom. And they just keep going through the cycles of going up and then down and then up and then down. So that's why you never need to actually make the hive bigger, because she'll always keep the size of the brood to whatever size that chamber is. And they'll just clean out the old empty eggs and just start relaying new ones. So I'm hoping you can see her there. This is the queen. You can tell because she's got a really big abdomen. And it's much larger than all the other bees in that photo. Obviously, all the other bees are quite small. And like I said, once she starts laying, she never leaves the hive. And that's the reason why, because she's so big that she can't fly anymore. And you can see here, all these little empty circular patterns are actually where she'll lay a new larvae or a new bee. And all the other ones are actually just bees waiting to come out. But you can see here, there is a larger one that, and for everyone at home, is pointing to down the bottom called a queen cell. This is what the virgin queen is. So she'll emerge, she'll be a virgin queen, she'll wait around until the queen either dies or gets overthrown, mate, and then come back and start again. The other reason that they lay queen cells is if they want to start a new colony. So say this hive, nice and strong, it's been going great for a year or two, and they decide that it's time to go off and start a new colony. What they'll do is they'll start sending away some worker bees to find a new location. They'll start building that up with some resources, so they'll start putting in the hive structure, the pollen and the pots. And then the queen, that virgin queen, she'll go off and mate and she'll start a new colony in that other area. Now this is important because we can actually use that process to create new hives, which I'll talk about shortly. Okay, so again, this is just a quick example of what our bees look like. The advantage you guys have here today is we actually have a hive just down here that we can go and have a quick look at on our break or at the end. For everyone at home, there is a colony at Central Gardens in Merrylands that you are more than welcome to go and check out. There's actually two colonies there. There's one in a log where the possum enclosure is, really hard to see because it's inside, and the other one is just outside near the lake. So you can go and check that one out anytime, just get an idea of the size of them and what they're like. So you can see here they're actually quite tiny compared to a honeybee. And down in the bottom corner, you can see a map of Australia. That shows you the general natural habitat of all stingless bees. So you can see they don't particularly go down into the cooler areas or into Western Australia. Pretty much Sydney is kind of the end of their natural habitat. So what's the aim of the program? Why are we doing this? Cumberland Council's aim, we now have a biodiversity strategy, and part of that strategy is to increase biodiversity. So our aim is to increase biodiversity through pollination. It's a good way to start because you're starting at the bottom and working your way up, rather than starting with those key big animal species that we seem to lose a lot of. This is something that everybody can get involved in. If you have a backyard, you can get involved. If you have a small balcony, I do know a few people who have them on balconies and they do fine. This is just one way of getting everyone involved in helping out our local environment. So yes, we want to increase bee populations throughout the LGA, and I definitely work pretty hard on trying to raise awareness and the importance of our native pollinators. Again, it's about building community around environment. So we also give hives to our local community gardens. So there's one here, there's one at Wentworthville. We did have one at Merrylands. And it's also about educating students. So I actually also run a separate program for primary school students where we go in and educate them about pollinators and also provide them with a hive as well. So the kids can really see the hives and interact with the bees themselves. And again, it's a great way to provide residents with an opportunity to actually engage the local environment in a way that's kind of cool, I think. So what is involved on your part? So you will have to sign the terms and conditions, which were on the website. You may have read them. Basically, they just say, just take care of the hive as best you can. If you have any problems, you contact the council. The other thing is you're a caretaker on behalf of the council. So you don't own the hive. It still remains the property of Cumberland Council. You just get the joy of having them in your garden and taking care of them for us. A lot of people find a lot of joy in just having them in their gardens, and they will sit there and have a cup of coffee and chat to their bees every morning. It's pretty funny. It's not a big commitment. You just need to check on them every now and again. They do take care of themselves. They're not like honeybees, so you don't need to worry about them swarming. They do swarm, but it's not how honeybees would, so it's not like the queen's leaving to go and start a new hive somewhere else. It's part of the natural process that I will talk about swarms soon. The other thing, you just need to notify the council if there are any concerns. So when I say there are concerns, if in summer on a lovely warm day you don't see any bees, and the next day it's a lovely warm day and you don't see any bees, contact the council. There may be something wrong with your hive. I say summer because in winter they're not as active and they will go days without coming out. These girls don't like the cold. I'll talk about cold and heat a little bit further on because that will make a bit more sense. You'll also need to participate in our program of creating new hives. We're going through a bit of a process that we're trialling a different technique. It takes a bit longer, but the advantage is you actually get to watch them build a new hive at your house. It's a pretty exciting process that does take about 12 months, but I think it's going to be quite rewarding for everyone to really engage with that process and actually see how much effort it takes for these bees to actually create a colony. So our boxes. We currently have one main type, which is the top one called the Goodridge box. I do have one here. It's a little yellow one in the middle. So currently we have most of those type of hives. These are good. They're made up into two segments, so we can do something called splitting, which I'll get on to. The other one we've got is that lightweight hive down the bottom. It is only designed to do something called a duplication, so it doesn't have that splittability aspect to it, but it does have the advantage of having a viewing panel. So I'll show you guys on the break how you can actually look inside the hive and check on your bees. Our other box doesn't have that functionality. The middle box there, called an oath, that was developed by a gentleman called Tim Hurd. He is an entomologist who has been studying stingless bees for about 20 years and actually developed these boxes. We will be using those boxes, but we'll be getting our Men's Shed, a local group, to actually build them for us. These will also have a viewing panel so that we can actually look inside occasionally to see what's going on, make sure our bees are doing well. So they're the three types that you'll probably see. I can't tell you which one you're going to get. It all depends on what stock and supply we have at the time. It probably won't be the top box as we're moving away from it. It'll probably be this middle box, which is a nice wooden box, or one of these lightweight hide boxes with the viewing panel in them. Okay, so setup. Setup is kind of really, really important. Our bees don't like extreme temperatures and they don't like extreme colds. So really think about where you need to set your hive up when you go home today. Go out into your yard where you're thinking you might put them and just kind of see where the sun is. And basically what you want to do is make sure that they get no sun in winter after about 10 o'clock, and in summer, we're saying now, no sun at all. We're getting really extreme temperatures now, and it is getting to be 30 degrees by 9 o'clock. So basically no sun after 9 o'clock would be good. I do know that that's hard. Everyone's backyards are different. And sometimes you may just be able to have a little bit of shade cloth over them to help that out. So direction, that's not so important. Some people say you should point them north or blah, blah, blah. They don't care. They're not that fussy. So wherever you've got enough shade to put them, they will be happy. Preferably, if you have a lovely tree, put them under a tree. Trees have a very cooling effect over man-made structures because they release a lot of water vapor into the air. So they naturally cool the area. So you can see here two photos. One is, I do believe that one is at Brookwood Cemetery. So we installed one at Brookwood Cemetery. They seem to love it there, lots of flowers. And it's just on a concrete block on the ground. So we ask you not to put them completely on the ground in the dirt. You can put them on a concrete block. This gentleman has set up a table for them and they just sit on a little table. And you can see, you can't really see it in this photo, but he's actually got a thermometer there so he can check the temperature constantly. And I do know this gentleman actually has a little notebook that he records notes in as well. I actually have a few people who record notes of temperatures, times, weights. They get really into it. It's great to see that they become so enjoyed and want to actually share that knowledge. And it's great for information for me as well. So they do share that kind of information with me. I'm leaning towards people trying to get them a little bit off the ground so that they have a better air circulation through them. This lightweight hive that you see over there, the white one, it actually comes, the gentleman who made it is, he's an engineer, I think, so he's built everything for it. So I don't know if you guys can see on the camera, but he's built his own little system, and this just goes straight on a star picket. And it sits there like that. So you can see he's welded the whole thing himself. We do have these for every one of those lightweight hives. So if you get one of those and you just want to put it on a star picket, we can do that. The great thing about this is when we want to do another duplication, we can actually just put a piece of metal here and put another hive right in front of it. And we don't need to worry about putting another star picket or finding another way. It actually all just sits on this one piece of kit. So very cool. He's a very innovative gentleman. He's thinking a bit outside the box. So that's just another idea if you wanted to raise it off the ground. So I'll talk a little bit about if you need to move your hive. So you may need to move your hive because it gets really, really cold in winter, your perfect summer location, and you might just want to move them out so that they get a bit of sun just to warm them up in winter. So there are two options. The first option I wouldn't recommend if all you're going to do is move your hive a little bit in your own garden, because you need to move it away for about 2 or 3 weeks before you can move it back. But this method is good if you are moving house or you're moving somewhere else. I don't know why. It's called the 1 kilometre move. So what we do is we lock the bees up in their home at night, and we move it 1 kilometre away from its current location. Now we do that because their foraging range is 500 to 700 metres. This is outside their foraging range. So they're not going to get confused and then fly back to their original home. We leave it in that location for a couple of weeks, and then we can move it to your new location if it's within that kilometre area. If it's outside that kilometre area, you're fine. You can just set it up where it is. So if you're at home and you realise that your perfect location isn't so perfect, then you need to move your bees, or something's happened, your trees fall down and you need to move them. We prefer this method, which is the 1 metre move. Basically means you move your hive 1 metre every day until you get it to its perfect location. Now, I don't recommend you do this in summer. So this is something you can do in spring and autumn to move it, maybe if you want to move it into a better location, get a bit more sun in winter, or to get it away from the sun in summer. Yeah, basically you just move it a little bit at a time. I know I have one that I move about 30 centimetres each day until I get it there. I have it on a trolley and I just kind of move it back in its trolley. That works. Honestly, if you set it up in a good location, you'll never need to move it. Majority of the people in this program don't move their hives. They don't see the need. They seem to be happy where they're set up. It's more a problem if it's getting too much sun over if it's not getting enough sun. They can handle the cold fairly well, but the heat is a real killer. So it will kill them a lot quicker than a bit of cold will. Just so you know, our bees return at night, every night, to their hive. So after about 5 o'clock, once it starts cooling down, they'll all just come home and chill out inside their hive at night. They don't forage at night, and the reason is because they use sight to find their way around. So sight and scent. So once it gets dark, they can't see, just like us. So they don't go out. And it's too cold, and they don't like the cold. So this is why we're saying you lock it up at night, because they'll already be inside and you can just close their little entrances and move them. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about temperatures. So summer is a real killer here in Western Sydney. We are getting some pretty extreme days, and unfortunately our bees just can't handle those extreme days. Now you might disagree and say, well, they've lived here, you know, they're perfectly fine, but they choose where they want to live in the wild. They choose their hollow logs, which are already well insulated. We choose where they live. We choose the material that they live in, and we choose their location. So we do need to take a little bit of responsibility in taking care of them. So they really don't handle temperatures over 38 degrees. So anything over 38 degrees, you may need to take some precautionary measures. If the area around your hive gets up to those temperatures, then yes, you definitely need to. I know some people who have them in the perfect location and it rarely changes the temperature in that location, so they don't do anything. But we would like it if you do take some precautionary measures during summer when it gets over 38 degrees. Ideally, if we're going to have a heat wave where it gets to 47 degrees, we would like you to lock your hives up and bring them in the night before a heat wave. Either bring them into your house or bring them into a nice cool area. I have a nice cool garage and I set them up in there for the day. It's simply because inside the hive, they regulate their temperatures to about 30, 35, 36, I think, to keep themselves nice and warm. But once you start getting over like 38, 39, the temperatures start increasing inside the hive like a lot. And what happens is once the wax gets to a certain temperature, it starts to melt. Once it melts, all the honey is released and they actually end up drowning inside in their hive. So it's a pretty horrible thing to do to them. So that's why we ask if you can lock them up and bring them up only in extreme temperatures. And I'm talking the hot, hot, hot days. We got a few of those last year. I know it was like 46, 47 degree day. They're the kind of days I'm talking.
You keep them locked up over
that whole heat wave day. I would even recommend, because some areas I know aren't cooling down at night either, but generally it would just be during that hot day, and then you could bring them out and at night and let them out the next day. So that would be fine. However, the most common method, and this is the one that I would recommend everyone use because most people use it and it's very effective, is just draping a wet towel over them, over the hive itself, having each end in a bucket. So you can see here there's 2 buckets either side of that hive. You wet the towel, put it over, put water on either side, and what it's going to do is have an evaporative cooling effect around the hive. This can actually cool the temperature around a hive by about 10 degrees. And that's the difference between them surviving and them dying. Again, you can move them into air conditioning or to a nice cool area. I would say when it gets to those extreme temperatures, do that. But you don't do this every day. Like I know summer gets hot. It's 38 degrees all the time. It's horrible. But it stresses them out as well. So we don't want to bring them in all the time or move them too much. So generally, most people get away with using the wet towel method. Some people just have the perfect setup and just let them be, really. But I recommend that if it's going to get over 30 degrees, just chuck the towel on. It's really not too much of an effort to do. Everyone has an old towel that they don't use anymore. It will make a difference for them. I like, with the little Goodrich hives, we actually have a little roof, and I just pop it over the roof and hang a little bit down so it gives that little bit of cooling effect. So on the other end of the scale here in Sydney, we also get quite cold days. You have to remember that our bees are generally from northern areas where it's very tropical, so they don't have extreme temperature variations like we do here in Sydney. But sometimes when it gets cold, we can lose hives. If the internal temperature inside the brood gets too cold, it will kill the whole hive. They'll just die from cold. But what happens, which is quite fascinating, is TCs will stop moving at 18 degrees. So inside the hive, they'll still be very active, but if you find bees outside, they literally just curl up in a ball and look like they're dead. It's really fascinating. So what you'll find sometimes is that the male drones will leave the hive and they'll roost outside at night, and they will look completely dead in winter. And then the sun hits them and they just come back to life and fly away. It's really fascinating. But I say this because in winter, you may go days without seeing any activity at all, because it's just too cold for the girls. They don't like coming out. And I can tell you now, spot on 18 degrees, they will start coming out. Anything under that, they will not come out. This is why we do say if you do have a location where they can get a little bit of morning sun, it's really good in winter because it helps them get a little bit active. It warms the hive up and they'll go out and forage. Don't be too concerned in winter if you don't see them for a few days if the temperatures are below 18 degrees. All right, the reason they build those stores up is so that they can handle those temperatures. And I know people who have locked a hive up for 3 months and it still survived. Don't know how, but it did. So the other problem we do have in our hives is something called excessive moisture. So you can imagine you're in a little box with 10,000 other bodies, you're creating a lot of condensation. So what you can see here around this entrance tube and all over there is actually the bees spitting out that condensation. So it's actually just a way of them stopping the condensation building up inside the hive. Most of our new hives will actually have a drainage hole in the bottom so that eliminates that problem somewhat. But if you do see this happening, particularly on the Goodrich hives, we do have a yellow foam box that we can put over them. Tim Hurd, the entomologist, recommends that you only put that on at night to stop that really cold temperature overnight hitting the box and causing that condensation. But I think you could probably leave it on during winter if you wanted to. So we're going to trial the foam boxes this year and see how they go. And if they work, we may just leave them on permanently because they'll also help protect them during summer. So that's just something that a lot of people worry about over winter is not seeing their bees. So again, we just talked about the insulation and sunlight. And obviously you don't want them in a really windy place because that will make it even colder. So how can you check if they are still active during winter if you don't see any bees coming and going? So the first one is to check for what we call waste pellets. And these are like little balls, brown balls that the bees will basically remove from the hive. What they do in winter is, because it's too cold and they don't want to go outside, is they just dump it all out the front of the hive. So you will see a pile of all this like little brown balls sitting at the front of the hive. This is a good sign. This means that the hive's still active, that they're still inside doing their thing. Basically, this is just their waste, their poop and everything else that they don't need in the hive. The other thing you can do is to check the entrance hole to see if there are what we call guard bees. Guard bees will always be at the entrance hole. These are the guards that stop insects from getting in and killing the hive. They are always there. On a cold day, they may go right inside the hive, so it's very hard to see them. The other thing you can do, and it does sound weird, but you can actually put your ear to the hole and listen to the buzzing. If you hear buzzing, it's a good sign that they're still alive. And this is another reason why the viewing panels become quite important. Now in winter, I wouldn't recommend opening the viewing panel a lot because you're going to introduce cold air into it because it's just a thin piece of plastic. But if you're really, really worried and you think something's happened to your hive, contact the council before you want to open that viewing panel, and I will ask you if you've done all the other things and you've seen all the other stuff and you go, no, 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 then we'll let you open it up and then we can go through if we can see anything that's happened in the hive. It may have died, they may have just been really quiet, but yes, so the ones that do have viewing panels, we can use that to check inside, but very, very rarely. So I talked a bit before about swarms, and our bees do swarm, but our swarms are very different to honeybee swarms. There are 3 main types of swarms that our bees do. The first one is called a fighting swarm or a takeover swarm. And this is where a hive from another area finds your hive going, I like that, I want that, I'm going to take it over. And they will fight to the death to take over that hive. So what you're going to find is thousands of bees in the air going crazy, but you're also going to find a lot of dead bees on the ground. And what happens is the bees from one hive grab the other bee from another hive, they lock into each other and they fight to the death. Literally will fight to the death. And you will find the ground will basically be covered in all these dead bees. There is not much we can do about this. A few people can move your hive away and we can put an empty box there and hope that that invading swarm may take it over. It does happen sometimes. So if you do find a fighting swarm, do contact us. We may be able to put what we call a bait box and try and get that new hive, that new colony into the empty box. The other thing is we just let them do their thing. And the crazy thing about these bees is the new colony will just take over that hive. They'll appoint a new queen, they'll use the cells, the eggs and everything that's already in there, and they'll just start living in it. What you'll find is you'll have huge amounts of activity with the fighting swarm, and then all of a sudden everything just goes back to normal. So they've either taken over the swarm or the colony has managed to fight them off. Either or, it's very rare that you will lose the hive. The other one will be a defending swarm. This probably wouldn't happen too much with you guys. This may only ever happen if you've got more than one hive in your area and they're very close together and a bee accidentally goes too close to the other hive. Generally, it won't look like a fighting swarm. There'll be no dead bees. You'll just have lots of bees flying around for like 2-3 weeks, and they'll just keep flying around. There's nothing you can do about it. Just let them be. And the last one is what we call a mating swarm. This is obviously when a new queen is ready to emerge and needs to mate with a male, and you'll find thousands of males lining up to get that chance. She will only mate with one of them though. So all those guys, there's like thousands of them, they only get one chance. So when you see this, nothing you can do, it's all fine. It won't be as aggressive, so the bees will kind of be flying around in all nice, gentle swarm. And then what you'll see at night is you'll see a lot of the male drones sleeping outside the hive. So they won't go inside. You'll find them, if you've got a tree, they'll be all like sleeping on a stick or something, or they'll all be like grouped together, just hanging out at night. If you see that, then it's most likely a mating swarm. It just means that they're appointing a new queen. The killers of our hives are the scyphid fly and the pharid fly. So the first one is actually a wasp. It's a wasp mimic fly. He's a pretty nasty looking guy. The way you can tell this wasp over other wasps is its Y-shaped antenna. So it has like, comes out and then separates. And this is a very good indication that you have this fly. So what it does is it lays its eggs in the crevices and cracks in your hive. So if you've got a split one, yes, it is a native. So both the top two are native. So they're native. Sorry, she just asked, are these flies native? Yes, they are native. So they are a natural enemy of our bees. So basically what they do is they lay their young inside the cracks of your hive, and then they come out as maggots and they basically just eat everything in the hive and completely destroy it. Pharid flies are basically, they're a fruit fly, and they are even worse than the scyphid fly because they're tiny, you don't generally see them, and they can fly straight into the hive and get completely missed by those guard bees. And again, they lay eggs and it completely destroys the inside of the hive. How do you know that you've got them? Well, the scyphid fly is pretty obvious. He's relatively big, you know, a couple of centimeters, so you're going to see it. It does look like a wasp. And the best way that we know how to get rid of them is just get a fly swatter and swat them away. If you do find that you've got these quite a lot, give me a call. What we can do is we can lock your hive up and move it away for a while, find out what's going on, because generally these will only enter a weak hive. If your hive is nice and strong, they can generally fight them off. With the Goodridge hives, the ones that open in half, which we split, they're the ones that are probably more common to getting these because they have the gap that they can get in, and we just tape that up. So we just ask that every summer you just make sure that's nice and taped. The bees will put their own internal seals in these places, but sometimes these best get through. If you do find that there's something wrong with your hive and there's very little activity during summer, it may be because of one of these pests. Just call the council and come out and quickly check it. We can rescue it if we get it early enough. If we don't get it early enough, there's no hope. There's just nothing left. It's pretty sad. I have lost a few, unfortunately, to this. It's the way life goes. There are traps that we can use for the fly, for the pharid fly. So if you do think that you've got an issue with them, just let me know and I can give everyone that recipe. I think I'll be sending it out in the next email, so you will receive that information. It's it's basically like other fruit fly traps. We just use vinegar and a bit of native bee honey to use that. The other one is the African hive beetle. So this is not a native to Australia. This has been brought in by the honeybee. It's not so common to attack our hives, but they have been found inside stingless beehives. What the bees will do is they actually grab them and they use their resin and they literally just stick them up on the wall and just leave them there to die. So you will, if you've ever seen inside a hive, that sometimes you'll find a couple of these. It's very rare that they will attack a hive to the point of destroying it. However, if you do have honeybees, then it may become an issue. So it's very, very common in honeybees. Most honeybee hives across Australia will have these hive beetles. So it's just about using good housekeeping if you've got honeybees, making sure that you've got traps in your own honeybee hive, that you're not leaving honey out, you're not leaving any resin out, you're not leaving any wax out, because those things are going to attract these sorts of insects to your hives. As for everyone else, if you don't have honeybees, it's unlikely that you would have a problem with these unless your neighbours have got honeybees and they're not managing their hives properly. So. The other predators, so they're predators that get inside the hive. What I'm going to talk about now are ones that are outside the hive. These are generally not going to kill your hive, they're just pains in the bum. So the first one is called the Bembex wasp, and it basically hovers outside the hive and catches bees as they fly out. They don't tend to take a lot. Some people say they only take the males. I don't believe that. I think they can grab whatever they can get, but I don't know the science on that. So if you do find these guys flying around, you can tell them because they've got like a black and blue bum, and they look like a kind of hoverfly. They kind of hover around the front of your hive, and they just wait for them. Just get a fly swatter, sort them out. That's probably the only effective way to get rid of them. We don't want you to spray them, obviously, because if you use a spray, you're going to kill the bees. So fly swatter usually is your best defense. Ants don't generally pose a risk. They won't get inside a hive unless the hive is really sick or it's already died. But you will find them around your hive. If you've got like one of those polystyrene boxes on the outside, they might get up underneath and set up shop inside that. So the ones that we've got here at Central Gardens, I know the foam boxes that we use, the ants live inside the foam box as well. And they kind of live in harmony, so they don't really bother each other. But if you do have a problem with ants and you don't want them near your hive, the best thing to do is to talk to us and we can put your hive on a pedestal, and then you just grease the pedestal so that they can't get in, or a star picket as well. Spiders will find your hive and they will set up shop at the front of your hive. I know one that figured out that I had a hive at my place because I used to get them delivered to me, and it would wait until I got delivered a hive and then it would set its little web up right out the front of where I like to put them. Look, they're not a huge problem, but just make sure that their spider webs aren't on the front entrance so that the bees can come and go. If you've got them living around, apparently you can use lemon to get rid of them. They don't like the smell of lemon, so a bit of cotton dipped in lemon might help. Just sit it on top of your hive. It's not going to disturb the bees, but it may keep the spiders away. And that's just a natural way. Obviously, again, we don't want to be spraying. I find that they're not too much of a problem, but if you've got a lot of them, then yeah, maybe try getting rid of them that way, cleaning out the webs on a regular basis. Okay, so how we propagate new hives. So what we have is we have around 40 hives out there at the moment, and we don't propagate from all of our hives every year. We generally like to keep them for 2 years before we do anything to them, and this gives them time to build up their resources, makes them nice and strong, and then we can go through the process of starting a new hive. So there are actually 2 processes that are used. One of them is called a budding or a duplication. You will hear a lot of people use the word adduction, and then there is the process called splitting. So I'll go over budding first. Budding is obviously the scientific name. I call it a duplication because it's a simple word for our residents to understand. And adduction is just something that a lot of people use. I don't particularly like the word because people get confused on Facebook between adduction and education. Words sound very similar. So basically what this is a way of naturally reproducing a hive from an existing colony. So I talked to you about when a colony is nice and strong and they decide that they want to create a new colony somewhere else, they'll start sending resources over to that new place, and then they'll send one of their virgin queens over. This is replicating that process, but forcing them to do it in our boxes. So what we do is we get what we call our mother hive, which is the strong, healthy hive, and we literally connect another box to that hive. And hopefully over time, they start building a new colony inside that. So they'll start building new structure, then they start building the pots where the honey and the pollen go, and then they start building the brood, and then eventually they'll have a new queen and they'll start the new colony in that new box. So the technique, basically what you can see in the photos is this bottom hose on the right side of the photo is the only entrance that the main hive can get out from. So the top ones, these are actually blocked off, they're just vent holes. And basically all they do is they're forced to go from their hive into the empty box to get out. And there's only one entrance in, one entrance out. And eventually, over time, they'll build a new hive if they're strong. They're bees. They're a natural insect, so they'll do what they want. If they want to do it, they'll do it. If they don't, it might just take a bit more time. Generally, I'm expecting it to take around 12 months from go to woe. So from the beginning of setting it up, connecting it, to disconnecting it, and being able to move that to a new colony. So I'm hoping that this is a process that we can go with going forward. It's a more natural process. It doesn't put any stress on the original colony. We're not touching that colony. We're not opening it up. We're not moving it in any way. So there's less risk of it dying or getting pests and diseases. Like I said, the great thing about this is you guys get to watch them build a new colony in a new box. And I think that's a pretty cool thing to do because you don't get that with the other method. You just open it up and you see what's inside. This, you literally see just how much effort it takes them to build a new colony. We have a few set up this year, so we're hoping that I would ideally love them to be ready by February, March next year, but I'm not kidding myself and I'm expecting them to be ready by this time next year. So those ones that I've set up will be ready for hopefully a new set of people next year, or if things don't go so well, it might be a few of you people might have to wait then. So I will say now it may be a 12-month wait for a hive, only because they take so long to build up their resources in order to either duplicate or split. So you can see it's actually quite a quick process, doesn't take very long, but again we are opening the hive, which does risk introducing pests and diseases in, and again you really do need to know what you're doing. So this process is something that you would, if your hive was going to be split, you would do with a council member. And again, I said I've teamed up with Ku-ring-gai Council. They have a list of volunteers to go out and help do the splits. So we're going to get a volunteer this year to help out. Just so that I've only done a few splits myself, so I'm nowhere near an expert in this. And so having that extra set of hands to help us guide us through is always a good thing, so that we have successful splits. I did split 6 hives last year, and unfortunately I did lose 2. So there is risk involved in it, which is a bit unfortunate, but we can do it. It is a process that a lot of people use, and if done correctly, it is very effective and quite successful. So I guess the last thing that I'm going to talk about, and I know that was a lot of information, and I do apologise because I know I talk very quickly, so if you've missed a lot, that's okay. You're more than welcome to ask me a million questions. If I can answer them, I will. Someone online did ask us about what plants to plant. This is not an extensive list. This is just a few key recommendations. Many of these have come from a lady named Kit. She is a PhD student from Western Australia who studies native bees, mostly solitary bees, and she's come up with a recommended list of preferred native plants that native bees generally forage on. So you can see there you've got your grevilleas, you've got your banksias, you've got your acacias, which are wattle trees, you've got your tea trees, flowering gums. They seem to love flowering gums. If you can get them, you can actually get dwarf varieties now, which only grow to about 4 to 6 meters. I know that sounds still pretty big, but for a gum tree, it's quite small. And they have beautiful flowers, big purple, there's big pink ones and bright orange ones. So they're quite nice. Your smaller variety plants, you've got your Dianellas, which we have a whole heap just out here in the gardens. They're your grass-like ones that have the little purple flowers. They love them. You've got your fanflower, the Scarvolia, your Hardenbergia. I have a Hardenbergia. I've never seen single species foraging on it, but it's a pretty plant, so something does. Pigface. As long as you get the right variety, there are a lot of different varieties of pigface and not all of them are native. This is the native species for Sydney called, I'm not even going to bother trying to say that. But you see it around everywhere. I think they're the big pink flowers on the succulent style plant, and it will grow anywhere, and it is super easy to grow, and they do really like that. There's some other species there. So like I was saying, they will forage on native plants and they will forage on non-natives. So they're not specialists. So if you have a veggie garden, they will probably forage on some of your flowers in your veggie garden as well. Some people say they prefer certain colours. I don't know. I see them on my yellow ones, my pink ones, orange. I guess it's just dependent on what they've got at the time. What I would say is try not to have just one species of everything in your backyard. So don't just have 100 different varieties of grevilleas. Have grevilleas, have banksias, have a good variety. So it gives them a good variety, but it also means that you're increasing native plants in your garden. I am developing up a list of endemic species of native plants, so plants that are actually from our local area, and there are a few people who do supply these specific plant species, because we have lost about 10%. We only have about 10% of the Cumberland Plain woodland left in Sydney, and it's the only place in the world that this plant community survives, and majority of it is from our LGA. So it's really important that we try and preserve some of those species, and if we can have people growing them in their backyards, it makes it even better. So I think that's kind of it for the whole presentation. I said it wasn't going to be a full 2 hours, but I like to give 2 hours anyway. I may not talk about solitary bees. I'm going to run a workshop in November on solitary bees and bee hotels. So if you're interested in that, just keep an eye out on the Facebook page and website. It's pretty fun. You'll get to make your own bee hotel, and we'll talk all about the types of solitary bees that we have here in Sydney, and how to attract solitary bees to your garden, which is great for the interim before you guys get your hives, because then you can learn about all the really cool, pretty bees that come to your garden. Because I hate to say it, our stingless bees are black and they're kind of not the prettiest bee out there. I like them, but there are prettier bees out there that you want to bring to your garden. So I will leave it there. I will skip through some of these, which you can read on your own. And again, people at home, I will send out these slides. I will talk a little bit about this actually. So this just compares keeping stingless bees to honeybees. This has come directly from Tim Hurd's book on the Australian Native Bee Book, and it just tells you the difference between managing stingless bees to honeybees. So you can see the honey production here is completely different. So our honeybees produce about 1 kilo of honey a year. I would say that's if you lived in Queensland where they can forage all year round. Here you would probably get that in about 2 years. So you would have to wait 2 years to get that quantity. Again, honeybees, you're getting about 50, and it's a different style of honey. So I guess the only other things are honeybees you can get all over Australia because they can survive really cold temperatures. Obviously, our stingless bees don't survive very well in cold, and that's why we're pretty much at the end of their foraging range. The other one was the cost. So what a lot of people don't realise is stingless bees cost a lot of money. We purchase them here at council on behalf of that, and this is why we're trying to duplicate our own, because buying a hive with bees in it is actually quite expensive. But that's why we have a standard amount that we purchase, and then we actually duplicate from our own. And yes, they're anywhere between $400 and $600 for a hive. So if you don't want to be part of the program and you want to purchase your own, that would be your outlay. But that's your first hive. And once you have that, then you can duplicate from that and create your new ones. If you're really good, you can build your own boxes and away you go. With our program, you won't be able to do that for a few years. I am hoping that if the duplication program style works, what will happen is you'll duplicate a hive for council 1 year, and then the next year we will allow you to duplicate your own hive, and then you can have your own one for yourself. It will be at your own cost. You won't be allowed to split because we won't let you open that, but you can do a duplication if our one goes successfully. So I get one and then you can have one, because we only plan on duplicating every 2 years a hive. But apparently the duplication process is a really good thing. Once they've done it once, they will just continue to do it. You just need to give them a few months time to recuperate, and then you can start again. Whereas with a split, it will be 2 years between splits. So there is that advantage of doing duplications, is that we can do them almost every year. And if they go well, then you might get your very own one for yourself at your own cost. So I was talking earlier to someone about honeybees and feral honeybee hives. So honeybees obviously are not native to Australia, they are introduced. They are not endangered, unlike what you hear a lot in social media. Honeybees aren't actually endangered. Their populations are increasing around the world. They're only decreasing in areas where they've had huge problems with colony collapse, which is North America and Europe. We have very healthy populations. Huh?
Where Monsanto works.
Yeah, we could say that. There's a lot of reasons why those things are happening, and management of hives over there is probably a big part of it. And yes, there's also the problem with pesticides and all the other things that I won't get into because I don't know enough about it to talk about it. But what I can tell you is that here in Australia, we do have very healthy populations of hives, to the point that we've actually got feral hive populations throughout the country. They're actually starting to cause some real concern for our biodiversity, for our native bees, and for other animals and creatures. Because what happens is, in Australia, if you have a honeybee hive, you need to register it with, here in New South Wales, it's the Department of Primary Industries. And the reason is that they want to know how you're managing your hive. They want to know if you've got any diseases. They want to know if your hive has died for some reason. And they really want to know whether varroa mite gets here. When it gets here, it will. It's a little mite that actually is causing a lot of the problems overseas. And so that's the reason they want you to register your hives. And so they know where they are, and they can monitor them. And if a breakout occurs, they can find out where it is. The problem is we're getting a lot of feral hives, which are hives that have gone from a managed hive off to the wild, and they've built a colony out in nature. The problem with that is it's not being managed. No one knows if they've got any diseases. They don't know how much they're spreading that disease. And they are risking our billion-dollar agricultural industry, because we do rely heavily on our honeybees for that industry. So if you do have a hive, or you know someone who goes, oh, I just have them living in my tree, it's fine. It's not fine. There are real issues with that. They do also find that feral hives tend to be more aggressive as well. So if they are in your neighbour's backyard, then they're more likely to be very more aggressive than anywhere else. They do displace endemic wildlife. They take over hollows in trees, and once they take over a hollow in a tree, even if you remove the bees, it can never be used again. It's full of comb, it's full of honey, and no other wildlife can use it. So that information down the bottom there, I think, was from Kit over in Western Australia. There's a lot of research being done by the national parks over there on how many feral hives they actually have. And they say, you know, they found 6 hives in one tree, 175 hives in a 4-kilometre creek line. That's a lot in one little area, and these are all feral. These aren't managed. I don't have anything against people keeping honeybees. I just want people to understand that if you find a feral hive, to contact a local apiary and ask if they can have it removed. They'll come and collect them, so that we don't have to destroy them, and they'll be a managed hive to take care of that.